The Falcons starters didn't really move the needle for me in the team's 13-13 tie to the Cincinnati Bengals. Find out why on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. We're going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So you guys know me as Aaron Freeman, your very humble host. And some of you keen observers may be wondering, Aaron, are you wearing the same shirt that you wore in last night's postcast? And the answer would be absolutely yes, I am. That is my commitment to you, the everydayers. I went to bed just before midnight and woke up at 7 a.m. just to grind film, no shower, just stanking on this podcast because I'm so serious. That's why they call me Serious Black, right? You also may know me as Mr. Drew. My friends call me Negative Nancy, but you can call me, you can become my friend and call me Negative Nancy by subscribing and following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast as an everydayer. So, Mr. Drew's going to rear his ugly head on today's episode because some of you guys are going to perceive negativity here, but let's talk about the Falcons starters getting their debut in this, tie game from the preseason as it is. We saw the opening drive for Desmond Ridder and the Falcons offensive starters. It didn't really move me in any major way. It was pretty meh to me. Basically, I think you saw what you wanted to see. Right. If you wanted to see Ridder go out there and execute this offense, you saw that. Right now, if you weren't 100% sold on Desmond Ridder's ability to be a high level quarterback, I don't think this opening drive was going to move you in any major way. And I think some of that is owed to Ridder being off target on a couple of throws and the Falcons offense mostly dinking and dunking. Of Ridder's 9 passes, I only counted 2 that traveled more than 10 yards in the air. The best one was that back shoulder throw to Drake London for 21 yards that traveled about 19 yards in the air that converted a third down. The other was a miss to London on a dig route that was a bit high, although you could argue that London probably should have caught that pass because it went through his hands. There was another dig to Kadero Hodge later in the drive where Hodge wound up being injured on that play. That traveled about 9.5 yards in the air, so you could potentially round that up. But the other 6 throws that Ridder had, went 8 yards, 2 yards, 2 yards, 5 yards, -1 yards on the screen pass, and 4 yards. So, does that really matter? Not really, right? But if you had questions about Ridder's ability to attack downfield, and we had talked to Adnan Ikic earlier this week on the podcast, and that's a legit question surrounding Desmond Ridder, especially when it comes to, wanting this offense to be more explosive. I don't think you came out of this game feeling that he answered those questions in terms of that. And so my biggest takeaway for Ridder and the starters on the offense was that they looked pretty much where they were at the end of last year, right? And this was something that we talked about in June when we were talking about explosiveness versus efficiency and how the Falcons in the Ridder's 4 starts last year had 8 10-plus play drives that reached the red zone, as they had last night in Cincinnati, where they had a 15-play drive that reached the red zone. And basically, if you extrapolate that number from last year, those 8 drives over a 17-game season, that would have led the NFL in those 10-plus play red zone drives in 2022. And our discussion back in June centered on, if that continues in 2023, will Ridder be more efficient in the red zone? And based off of last night, I think if you're going to criticize the quarterback a little bit, as I'm doing right now on this podcast, I think that's where you would be critical. That's where things kind of broke down for the Falcons. There was a play that was wiped out by a Chris Lindstrom holding call, so it didn't really matter regardless, but Ridder did scramble in the play where he had both a open Drake London and Bijan Robinson in the end zone, didn't see them rather than tucking the ball. And then you saw that drive in with an interception from Desmond Ridder, and it looked like it was a throw that was slightly behind Scotty Miller. So I know a lot of people will say, hey, they should have thrown a flag for defensive pass interference. To me, that would have been a ticky-tack call. It was kind of a bang-bang play. And so if I was charting that interception, I would have charted it on as a quarterback error based off of questionable ball placement. So I know I'm going to hear from many of you guys in the comments, because I have a slightly different opinion about a football player. which is, such a terrible thing to have in this day and age. Again, I know many of you are going to hear this and see it as negative. To me, I'm just neutral to it, right? That's basically it, right? One of the questions we had was, is this offense going to be more explosive? And Arthur Smith told us ahead of time this week that we weren't going to see the team trying to be explosive in this game, that they were going to be vanilla. They were looking to run their most basic version of their offense. And to Ridder's credit, he did a pretty good job executing all that vanilla stuff. So to me, there's going to be people on both sides of this, Desmond Ridder civil war, as there always is with fans, that will use that drive to push whatever their narrative is. And, my narrative is truth. And as condescending and pretentious as that sounds, the truth as I see it is that opening drive was pretty meh to me. Right. And just like I felt like we're going to find more about Desmond Ridder come September when the real bullets start flying. And, as I've said before in this podcast, it's not really where you start, it's where you finish. And we'll see where Desmond Ridder finishes, hopefully in week 18 and beyond this upcoming season. And hopefully my reaction won't be meh, right, at that point in time. So like I said on this podcast before, we're not going to do a referendum on Desmond Ridder each and every week, but it was worth noting that the Falcons starters on offense were going up against the Bengals defensive starters on the opening drive. We did not, however, see the Bengals starting offense take over after Ridder's interception, with Jonah Williams, their right tackle, being the only regular starter that was out there on that drive. And, I thought the Falcons defense was fine, right? They were able to be pretty effective stuffing the run. And, you think that should be the case going up against the Bengals backup offensive line. If they were getting gashed by the run, that would have been a problem. They didn't really get a whole lot of pressure on that drive outside of the one foiled screen pass where Calais Campbell nearly had a sack on that play. I wish the coverage would have been a little bit stickier, but for the most part, they did their jobs, right? They got off the field, they bent, but they didn't break at the end of the day. So my biggest takeaways from the defensive starters performance is really more personnel related. We did get to see Arnold Ebiketie work as that strong side linebacker with the starting defense when they were in an underfront with Bud Dupree, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, and Calais Campbell being their 4 down linemen in that front. We did get one snap of the Falcons 3-2-6 dime defense where Grady Jarrett was the D tackle in the middle and Campbell and Dupree were the edge rushers on that play. Richie Grant was sort of the quote unquote dime safety that was lined up over the tight end with Jesse Bates and Jalen Hawkins playing deep as the other two safeties on that play. It was worth noting as well that Caden Ellis seemed to be the guy that was calling defense, playing more of a Mike linebacker than the projected Will linebacker versus, Troy Anderson. Will that change at some point? Will Troy Anderson start calling defense, or will that be something that we will see throughout the entire season? So, I thought the Bengals did a pretty good job, knowing that the Falcons were going to play a lot of man coverage, that they dialed up a bunch of rub routes. They were pretty effective, including one on that opening drive where it was a 3rd down and Trey Flowers got beat by Andre Yoshevitz on a rub route, but Jesse Bates made a great play, made a great tackle, shy of sticks on that play to force it a 4th and 2 as well. And it was notable to me, at least, only to me, because I'm, so full of an ego. But, Jen Hale, who was doing the game on the sideline for, Fox in Atlanta, called Jesse Bates a guardian angel. And I'm like, I recall somebody else calling Jesse Bates a guardian angel back in July, talking about him in this defense. So I'm like, is Jen Hale an everydayer? Okay, we'll see. I'll reach out to my associates over at Fox to find out more. But it was also notable that we got to see Lorenzo Carter, Timmy Horn, Albert Huggins, and Zach Harrison rotate in as the 4D linemen when those starters needed a breather. So that's kind of your second string or quote unquote base defense that are going to get a lot of those reps on, early downs when the Falcons are saving, Onyemata, Jarrett, and Campbell for, 3rd downs and passing situations. So the only other note I had from the starters was how much 11 personnel the Falcons were in those 3 wide receiver sets, right? On the offense, of the 19 plays that were called, some of those were wiped out by penalties. 10 of those were the Falcons were in that 11 personnel. So, 53% of the time was nearly double what the Falcons had last year, which is about 28% of the time. So that's just another indicator that Arthur Smith is not really tipping his hand. And that's why, you can get some things out of the preseason, but you can't read too much into it. So we'll talk about sort of what happened after those two opening possessions for the Falcons once we saw the starters get off the field. And of course, we're going to talk about that blue magic, that Bijan Robinson, his debut. We'll break down the other rookies like Matthew Bergeron and Clark Phillips that debuted as well to continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, just like the Atlanta Falcons, who are trying to hire the right people to make their roster in 2023, you may be a hiring manager or small business owner that's looking for the right people to make you reach your goals in 2023. And it's easy for you because you don't have to sweat in that Georgia heat, but you can go to LinkedIn Jobs and you can quickly attract and hire the qualified candidates by matching with the people that have the skills, values, and experiences that are going to help you achieve your goals. You can put your free job post in minutes in front of over 800 million member profiles to find the most qualified candidates. With LinkedIn Jobs, it's easy to screen and rate applicants based off your job qualifications all on this one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is here to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So let's give a breakdown of what happened in the game, right? You heard me break down the two opening drives where the Falcons starters were out there. Those two opening drives basically consumed the entire first quarter. And then not much happened in the second quarter. We did get to see Taylor Heinicke step in at the quarterback position. He did hit a couple of throws, did lead the team down the field. The Falcons did get a break on an awful taunting penalty against the Bengals where Heinicke couldn't connect on a deep throw to Scotty Miller in the end zone on third down that gave the Falcons a fresh set of downs in the red zone. They didn't take advantage. They wound up settling for a 36-yard field goal from Younghoe Koo to get their first points of the game, 5 minutes to go in the half. So it was nice to see Koo shake off the rust from last week in this game after he missed 2 PATs, made 2 field goals, including the game-tying one at the end. But, after getting the ball back, the Falcons went down the field and went for it on a 4th and 5 at midfield. They failed to convert. Cincinnati took advantage of that favorable field position in the final 25 seconds of the half. Got kicker Evan McPherson into range to hit a 50-yarder to tie the game 3-3 at the half. In the third quarter, the Bengals put in their quarterback, Jake Browning. He marched them down the field, but the drive was stymied in the red zone. They settled for a 31-yard field goal that pushed their lead to 6-3. The Falcons responded with Heinicke leading a touchdown drive. He had a couple of nice throws, including a nice deep ball to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside for 28 yards. It got the ball down to the 1-yard line. Carlos Washington then punched it in for a score to give the Falcons a 10-6 lead with 5 minutes left in the third quarter. Bengals had a long drive get into the fourth quarter, but they couldn't convert in the fourth down. The Falcons also had a turnover and downs on their subsequent drive where a pass to Penny Hart was broken up and he kind of slammed his head on the turf and exited the game to deal with a concussion protocol. Then the two teams kind of traded 3 and outs. Then you saw DeMarcco Hellams make a play, had his second pick of the interception with getting the ball back for the Falcons with about 5.5 minutes to go. Logan Woodside was now in at this point, but the Falcons failed to take advantage of that turnover. Bengals got the ball back with 3 minutes left. Jake Browning hit some throws and scrambled for a bunch of yards, set up a 3-yard touchdown run by Chase Brown with under a minute to go. That gave Cincinnati a 13-10 lead with 50 seconds left in the game. It looked like it was over, but of course, that magic man, Logan Woodside, we might need to call him Red Magic or something. I don't know. He hit Zay Malone for a 19-yarder. Then he hit John Fitzpatrick down the seam for a 25-yarder that got the ball into Bengals territory in under 30 seconds. Hit a check down to Carlos Washington for 9 yards, spiked it with 12 seconds to go. Then threw an absolute dime to Zay Malone that should have been the game winner in the end zone, but Malone dropped it. And then that stopped the clock with 6 seconds to go. Koo came out, hit game-tying 45-yarder to end the game in a tie. So let's talk about the rookies, right? Now that you know what happened, let's talk about Bijan Robinson. I know we've gone so long, over almost 15 minutes, without talking about Bijan Robinson on this podcast. And we mostly saw him as a runner, and he did make a nice one-handed grab on a screen pass on that opening drive. We saw the burst, we saw the juice. Like I've been saying for months, there's 2 types of people in this world. They're the Bijan Robinson fans and the people that haven't watched him yet. And so if this game was your introduction to Bijan Robinson, you absolutely became a fan because you saw the burst, you saw the quickness that led to so many people, calling him this sort of generational, as the overused term, prospect. only on a handful of touches. I'm sure most of you guys watching or listening have seen some Bijan highlights, so you didn't see anything that you hadn't seen before from what Bijan, but we didn't really get any of the positionless stuff. Again, Arthur Smith, being vanilla, we didn't see him really lining up outside of the backfield or anything like that. And but if you had any concerns about Bijan's gifts as a runner, which I don't think anybody seriously had any concerns about that. It was just people that were pushing narratives, anti-running back narratives, positional value narratives, all that sort of stuff. But he answered all those questions. Let's talk about Matthew Bergeron, who also made his preseason debut. He did give up one pressure on the opening drive. BJ Hill beat him with like a swim move or whatever, but I thought his run blocking was pretty good. He did showcase the athleticism, the movement skills that makes him a great fit in this outside zone scheme, making the reach blocks, climbing to the second level. Also showed some of that mean streak playing through the whistle. So I thought it was a good debut for Matthew Bergeron, making you feel pretty good about where he's starting out. There's probably going to be some ups and downs throughout his rookie season, but I don't think the floor is as low as I think some people were worried about with Matthew Bergeron coming in as that starting left guard based off of this performance against, some quality D tackles like DJ Reader and BJ Hill for the Bengals. Clark Phillips also made his debut. He looks really solid in coverage. Had some pressures on some cornerback blitzes where he was kind of unblocked off the edge. So I thought it was an impressive debut for Clark Phillips, delivering on a lot of the hype that he was getting in training camp. As for the rest of the rookie class, we'll see if something pops up on the All-22. Didn't see a whole lot from Zach Harrison that moved one way or the other. Just kind of, he was out there doing stuff, right? Like, not saying he played poorly, but just didn't pop really, watching the game on the broadcast view. DeMarcco Hellams did pop though. We saw the run support ability that we've been talking about, him being that enforcer against the run, making very good tackles in the open field. And then this week got that second interception. And unlike last week on that Trey Flowers deflection, where he was just kind of in the right place at the right time to make that play, I thought he made a great play himself, jumped that throw perfectly to get that second interception. I know Micah Abernathy has been getting the sort of second team safety work, but beside Jalen Hawkins throughout camp and continuing this game. And he's also been the primary personal protector on the punt team, which is a critical role for that unit. But I think Hellams has more than shown enough that he's going to make this roster. So to me, at this point, the Falcons, if they are going to keep Micah Abernathy, who hasn't been doing that much on defense to really, wow me or anything like that. He did have a pass breakup in this game. But I would imagine the Falcons at this point are going to keep 5 safeties, right? And we also did see Hellams as one of the quote unquote starters on the punt coverage unit as well, playing as one of the wings there, opposite Hawkins, who's the other wing there. So that's a positive sign that I think Hellams is well on his way to making the roster, given that a lot of people went into camp saying that he was, more of a practice squad guy. Javon Gwynn, the other Falcons draft pick, I thought looked a little bit better, looked a little bit more comfortable this week than he did last week. Again, I'll double check on the All-22 or whatever. I didn't really recall any low snaps from Javon Gwynn at the center position. And that is going to be something we'll talk about as we continue today's episode, talking about the second string offensive line and why we still have concerns there. There were a couple of low snaps from Ryan Newsel in this game. And so, that leads us to a conversation where we do get to talk about Jalen Mayfield once again on this podcast, who did not shine in this game, but we'll also talk about some of the players that did shine in this game, at least upon my rewatch, as we continue and wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the offensive line remains a concern. And before we get into the second string offensive line, it was not a great night for the Falcons starting offensive line. Chris Lindstrom got a couple of flags, although I think one of them was a very questionable holding call. But he had a couple of other bad reps that stood out to me. So it was a rough night for him. Keelan McGarry also had a false start, had a couple of bad reps where I think it was Cam Sample that sort of beat him cleanly with speed or whatever. So, even though we're much more concerned about the second string offensive line, it did look like the starters looked a little bit rusty as well. So not something that's a major concern, but certainly, if you thought they were going to immediately pick up where they left off and be like a top 5 unit, they did not look like a top 5 unit against the Bengals. But, again, we'll see how the regular season goes. We're not going to read too much into it. We did get to see Jalen Mayfield get some work at left tackle. It was Also a rough night for him, as well as several others on that second string offensive line. The pass protection woes did rear their ugly head, as they did a week ago against Emmanuel Ogbah. But to be fair to Jalen Mayfield, right, as far as we know, the first time he was getting significant practice reps at left tackle ever in his career was this past Monday, right? And to be basically asked to play a game 4 days later, um, with only a couple of days of practice at that position, is probably not setting him up for success, right? So I am not going to sit here, as I did on an episode earlier this week, and bash Jalen Mayfield. In part because I already spent an episode this week bashing Jalen Mayfield. But as I said on that episode back on Wednesday, like, we have a very long way to go before anybody should be talking about Jalen Mayfield as this quote unquote improved player and potentially as a swing tackle, as so many people were earlier this week. Not here on Locked On Falcons, but elsewhere in Falcons fandom. So we'll leave that aside for today. I know some of you guys are like, oh, you're not going to bash Jalen Mayfield in today's episode. Like, hey, you all saw it. Like, I already told you that this was the situation. So, like, every dayers know. So I'm not going to belabor the point here. So we know the swing tackle remains a major concern for this football team. We've known that for months. Like, we've been talking about this since, the end of May, early June, that the Falcons were likely going to be shopping at the end of the summer for a new swing tackle. And nothing we've seen in these first two preseason games has suggested that that won't be the case. Now, as for the rest of the second unit, given the concerns we have there with the season-ending injury to Matt Hennessy, who was the one backup that we did have confidence in, I did think Ryan Nuzul still looks the best. He's probably the backup that I have the most confidence in, playing both center and guard. He did have a couple of low snaps in this game. You got to remember, Nuzul was a guard in college exclusively, and has only started making that transition to the center position starting last summer. I thought Kyle Hinton was okay relative to the other guys, like especially relative to Vrabel and Mayfield and Jonathan Harrison, who were bad in this game. I thought Hinton was outstanding in comparison, but overall it was probably like a 5 out of 10 or maybe a 6 out of 10 in this game. But when everybody else is like a 2 or a 3, like, you look great in comparison. So that shopping list potentially for the Falcons offensive line depth includes a swing tackle, potentially another guard. I'm looking at you, Kobe Gossett. He's currently working third string with the Browns and doesn't look like he's going to make the roster. I know a lot of people have been talking about Dalton Reisner as a potential pickup. I'm not a huge Reisner fan. I don't even know if the Falcons should have the patience to pick up Reisner, because, how long is it going to take him to get up to speed in this offense, given it's a new offense? You look back to last year when we picked up Chuma Adoga at the beginning of the summer, or at the end of the summer before the season started. He was inactive for the first 8 of the first 9 games, right? And I imagine some of that inactivity was due to him still learning the offense, even though he was coming from a jet system that was similar, coming from the Mike LaFleur offense that year. And, how long is it going to take a player like Reisner to pick up the offense? 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, right? Kobe Gossett does know this offense, and I don't think the drop off from Reisner to Kobe Gossett is massive, right? You're talking about a 5 to a 4 on a 10-point scale. So I suspect if and when the Falcons also address the swing tackle position, I'm looking at a player like Dennis Kelly over in Philadelphia. It looks like he's on the outs there. You want someone that has played in this offense that can sort of be ready to go, as early as week 2 or week 3, if need be, if there's an early season injury, rather than, picking up a guy like Reisner, who may not be ready to play until week 6. And so, like, what's the point? You're still, you're going to play Ryan Nuzul. So what's really the value of that? So we'll see about that offensive line issue. Still remains a major question mark. But let's end today's episode on a more positive note, talking about some of the standouts and sort of where the roster and depth chart stands at this point in time. I thought D'Angelo Malone really popped in this game. I thought he was very active and effective as a pass rusher. I saw some good reps from Delonte Scott, who the Falcons just picked up this week. Showed some pass rush moves in this game. I thought Godwin Igwebuike, continues to look like a very rosterable player as that RB4, and given some of the questions we have about Cordero Patterson and whether he's going to be 100% come week 1, dealing with whatever the soft tissue injury that he's battling currently. You couple that with Igwebuike's kickoff return skills, more decisive running in the blocking scheme, especially compared to Carlos Washington in my eyes. And it also seemed like he was a little bit more comfortable in pass protection. And one of the things that you've heard me harp on, for 5+ years on this podcast is like, pass protection really matters when it comes to running back, a lot more than most people think. And I think Igwebuike checking all of those boxes makes him, to me, a clear cut head and heels above Carlos Washington at this point in time. So when I'm doing the math on the roster, I'm like, okay, well, we might keep 4 running backs now, right? In not counting the fullback in Keith Smith. And then now we're keeping 5 safeties. And so that probably means instead of 7 corners, we're keeping 6. So, Darren Hall, sucks to be you. Only 4 linebackers potentially. Andre Smith, who made some plays in this game, maybe your ceiling is a practice squad spot. Only 4 tight ends. So, that leaves someone like a John Fitzpatrick back on the practice squad rather than on the roster, and only 2 quarterbacks. Logan Woodside, you're doing your best to continue the strong legacy of that number 11 jersey. But I don't think numbers kind of tell me that the Falcons can't really afford at this point in time to carry 3 quarterbacks on their roster at this point in time. So nothing is set in stone. But I think there are some clear-cut favorites for some of these back-end roster spots, going into this final preseason game, like guys like Igwebuike, et cetera. So we'll see how that shakes out. Still a lot more football to be played next week, where we probably won't see the starters, but a lot of these guys that will be fighting for not only roster spots, but primarily practice squad spots, right? And, we'll wrap up on the injury front. We'll get an update on Cordero Hodge at some point, probably today, tomorrow, whenever you're listening to this. He was seen in the boot after the game, after that tackle. And the way that he got rolled up was very similar to me, the way that Patrick Mahomes got rolled up, and you see these high ankle sprain type of thing. So we'll see what that situation is like that. He was getting work as the number 3 wide receiver to start this game. It was notable to me that Scotty Miller and Josh Ali did get some reps with that starting offense. So it seems like they're the 4 and 5 receiver in this group. Scotty Miller, I may be mistaken there. And so we'll see if Hodge's injury keeps him out for an extended period of time. I'm expecting Hodge to be one of the gunners on the punt team. I don't think he got hurt before the Falcons had a punt, so we never got to see that in this game. And you could imagine a scenario where Hodge starts the season on IR, misses like the first 4 games, dealing with whatever he's dealing with or something like that, and that does open the door for a 6th receiver to potentially make the roster, right? And then that would move. If Hodge is the 3 and he's on IR, then Miller's the new 3, and maybe Ali's the 4, and then maybe a 6th receiver. And despite that, backbreaking drop that he had late in the game, I did think Zay Malone was kind of the guy that continues to kind of be standing out among the other receivers competing for a position. But again, I think that's a battle that we won't really get true clarity until all those guys play an entire game, for 4 quarters next week against Steelers. Penny Hart, we'll have to see, he got checked out for that concussions, as I mentioned earlier, and that also will have an effect on that wide receiver depth as well. So that's a spot that's still wide open, but it does feel like, at least based off of the depth chart at this point in time, the Falcons may be leaning towards Josh Ali, as that 5th wide receiver, but he may wind up being the 4th wide receiver, depending on what happens with Cordero Hodge. So we'll potentially have more takeaways tomorrow's episode, where I will probably be able to get to watch more of the All 22. We'll see if I can, scrounge up a guest in the meantime as well, or if that will wait till later in the week. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And of course, check out the Locked On NFL podcast as your second listen, to get the lowdown on the other 31 teams that will be playing in their mostly second preseason games this weekend, and sort of who stands out in those ways, as well as Locked On Sports Atlanta, to get other thoughts on this preseason game from people like John Chuckery and Jarvis Davis and Tanisha Batiste, as well as, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks. All of it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Parker Hesse's better than Michael Pruitt.